Several years ago, I bought a used car off Craigslist. My old car, ancient but beloved, had finally given out, and the repairs would have cost more than the car was worth. I didn't need anything brand new, just something a bit newer and more reliable. Craigslist always felt like the place to find the best deals, so that's where I went. One listing immediately caught my eye. It had just been posted maybe half an hour earlier, and the price was so low it almost seemed suspicious. The description was bare bones. The car ran well, had relatively low miles. That was it. No long story, no extra details. I messaged the seller right away, figuring something like that would disappear fast. He replied almost immediately and said I could come see it that same day. We agreed to meet behind a Target in the parking lot. The car looked exactly like the photos. The seller was a guy who said his name was Jim or something similar. Average height, dark brown hair, big hat, sunglasses. Nothing memorable about him beyond that. We took it for a quick test drive on the nearby highway. It ran smoothly, and the mileage matched the ad. I couldn't figure out why the price was so low, but I couldn't find anything wrong with it either. On the spot, I decided to buy it. It was wild, first day of looking, and I already had a car. I drove it back to my place. I lived alone in a pretty average-sized house. The next day, I decided to really clean the car out, inside and out. It was used after all, so I wanted to vacuum, wipe everything down, the works. I started in the back and worked my way to the front. When I got to the front passenger seat and started vacuuming the cushion, something felt off. As I pushed the nozzle into the crack between the seat and the backrest, the part you sit on shifted. I tugged at it, feeling around, and the entire bottom of the seat lifted up. Underneath was a hidden compartment. Inside that compartment was a stack of cash. For a second, I just stared. It was all neatly packed, 20s, 50s, hundreds. I took it inside and counted everything slowly. It came out to just over $10,000. I called a friend, and he came over to see it. We sat there trying to figure out what to do. We didn't even know if the guy I'd bought the car from knew about the compartment. The money might have belonged to someone who owned the car before him. Still, it was hard to imagine someone forgetting over 10 grand in cash and selling the car without checking. That night, curiosity got the better of me. I went back out to the car and started looking more carefully. I found 4 more hidden compartments. There were some under the other seats and one built into the center console. The whole car had clearly been customized for hiding things. All the other compartments, though, were empty. Even so, the whole thing felt wrong. There was something off about the car now that I couldn't unsee. I sat there, debating whether I should call the police or the previous owner first. In the end, I decided to call the owner, but since it was already late, I figured I'd wait until morning. That same night, around 11 p.m., I was in bed, not quite trying to sleep yet, when I heard a noise outside. It sounded like someone was on my property. I left my bedroom and went into the living room, which had a window facing the front. When I carefully peeked out, I saw 2 men standing in my driveway. It was too dark to get a real description. I could just barely make them out moving around my new car. One of them tried the doors. A moment later, I saw him smash the front passenger window. That's when it clicked. It was probably the guy I bought the car from and someone with him. I called the police right then. Something about the whole situation felt very wrong. The 2 men climbed into the car and started rummaging around inside. I sat on the floor in my living room, phone in hand, waiting for the police to arrive, listening to the glass crunching as they moved. After a few minutes, they got out and started walking into my front yard, heading toward my house. Panic kicked in. I didn't know what to do, so I went to the light switch and flipped it on. The bright light inside made it much harder to see out, but through the glare I could make out their shadows shifting away, moving off toward the left. I went back to the window and squinted out. I saw them walking away down the street. I felt a rush of relief when they were finally out of sight, but the police still hadn't arrived. 2 or 3 minutes later, I saw the patrol cars pulling up. I went outside, explained what had happened, and showed them my smashed car window. Nothing was missing. I never left anything valuable in the car. Then I brought out the cash I'd found and gave it to them. After answering some more questions, they left, and I eventually went back to bed. The next day passed normally. I didn't get any updates from the police. That night, though, something else happened. This time I actually was asleep. Around midnight, I woke up with this sudden, heavy feeling that those guys were back. I got out of bed and walked to my bedroom doorway. From somewhere near the back of the house, I heard a strange scraping or tapping at one of the windows. I didn't hesitate this time. I called the police immediately, locked my bedroom door, and hid in my closet. From inside the closet, I could barely hear anything. It was mostly quiet. After a short while, I heard a few more sounds, louder thuds, and it really did seem like someone had broken part of a back window. I stayed hidden and didn't move. This time, the police showed up much faster. When I heard them come in, I stepped out of the closet and went to meet them, telling them I thought someone might be in my basement. They went down, and a minute or two later, they came back up with the same two men from the night before. They'd started to break through one of my back windows, but hadn't fully gotten inside before the police arrived. Later, I found out they were indeed the previous owner and his accomplice. The money had been obtained illegally somehow, maybe a robbery, maybe something else. I never got the details. They'd sold the car cheaply to get rid of it and the evidence, stashing the money in all those compartments. They must have forgotten that one last stash of cash. It was a crazy situation, but in the end, things turned out okay, and I was just glad they were caught. About a year ago, in early winter, I went solo hiking for the weekend in a national park not too far from home. Weather reports said it would be the last decent weekend before cold and snow rolled in, and I wanted to squeeze in one more good hike. A friend had told me about a trail that supposedly led to a beautiful view overlooking a lake. He said it wasn't very crowded, which sounded perfect to me. When I got there, though, it wasn't what I expected. There were no trail signs, no markers, just a thin, narrow path cutting off through the trees. I walked a short distance down it. Even without markings, it seemed simple enough to follow. It was clear not many people used it. Barely any shoe prints in the dirt, and nothing about it looked professionally maintained. It didn't scare me, I just mentally noted it. The forest itself was gorgeous. Fallen leaves everywhere, trees changing color, little sounds of wildlife all around. It was peaceful. About a mile in, I passed something odd, a narrow side path splitting off into the woods. I stayed on my original trail. I didn't really understand why there'd be additional paths branching off a trail that hardly anyone seemed to use. As I kept walking, more and more side paths started appearing. They cut off in random directions into the trees, leading to nowhere obvious. No signs, no markers, just narrow tracks slipping into the underbrush. It was strange. After about 3 hours of walking, my trail just stopped. No gradual fading, no fork, just an abrupt end. In front of me was nothing but trees. I stood there for a second, annoyed and confused, when I suddenly heard footsteps behind me. I spun around and saw a man in the distance. He had on a ripped jacket and no backpack. He wasn't on my trail exactly. He was walking across it, heading down one of those side paths. He never looked up. His head was down, and he just moved with this slow, off-putting gait. Something about him was eerie. I instinctively tried not to let him see me and watched as he disappeared into the trees. By then, the daylight was clearly fading. I decided to forget about the lake and just get back to my car while I still could. On the way back, I reached a junction of paths that I didn't remember going through on the way in. A tangle of trails branched off in different directions. I thought about how suddenly my original path had ended and realized I must have accidentally taken a wrong turn earlier. I tried to see if any footprints on the ground looked like mine, but the dirt was too disturbed or too hard to read. Then I heard footsteps behind me again. I turned and looked out through the trees. In the distance, standing still between the trunks, was the same man. He was facing directly toward me. He didn't speak or move. He just watched. A cold wave went through me. I turned my back on him and took the trail that led in the opposite direction of where he stood. I walked fast, glancing over my shoulder again and again. After a few minutes, I couldn't see him anymore. I stayed on that trail for over an hour, increasingly worried that I was completely lost and that this strange man might be following me. Eventually, exhausted, I stepped off the path and leaned against a tree to drink some water. Almost immediately, I heard those same slow, shuffling footsteps. I slipped behind the tree and tried to make myself small, holding my breath. The footsteps got louder, closer, until the man walked right past where I was hiding, just a few feet away. He stared straight ahead at the trail, like he assumed I was still up there somewhere in front of him. At that point, I had no doubt he was tracking me. Once he'd gone far enough ahead, I ran back the way I'd come, reaching the confusing intersection again. Out of the remaining two options, I picked one and just went for it. Luckily, it turned out to be the right one. About halfway back to where I thought the trailhead was, the light finally died, and I had to rely on weak moonlight cutting through the branches to see. I did make it back to my car in the end. All I can say is that man didn't look like he was out there for a casual hike. Given how he moved and how he repeatedly tried to follow me, I'm pretty sure he had something terrible in mind, and that I just barely got away from it. This happened a few months ago. I live alone in what I'd call a very average neighborhood, in a house on a quiet street. One night I was in the living room by myself, just relaxing and watching TV around 11 p.m. My phone vibrated with the specific buzz it makes when I get a text message. I picked it up and saw a number I didn't recognize. The text said, "Hey, I'm outside." Right away, it struck me as bizarre. I assumed it was just a wrong number. I thought about texting back to tell them they had the wrong person, but instead I shrugged it off, tossed my phone aside, and kept watching TV. Maybe 10 minutes later, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye near the side window in the living room. The bushes outside were shifting. I looked over, and for a split second, I saw what looked like a person walk past the window. It was too dark and too fast for me to make out any details. Honestly, if I hadn't been on edge because of that text, I might have written it off completely. But it really did look like someone had just walked by. Now that text came right back to mind. What if it wasn't a wrong number? What if whoever texted really was outside my house? I had no idea who it would be or why. I texted back and asked, "Who is this?" The reply came almost instantly, "Come outside and you'll see." I got a really bad feeling. I stood up and went to the front window. My front yard looked empty. No one in the driveway or on the sidewalk. I closed all the shades and began checking every window in the house. Side windows, back windows, everything. I didn't see anyone anywhere, but there were plenty of spots someone could easily hide. I walked back into the living room. As I did, I heard a loud knock from the back of the house. It sounded like it was coming from one of the windows. My stomach dropped. I went into the dining room, which faced the backyard, and peered through the glass. Whoever had knocked was hiding again. The yard looked empty. I went back to the living room and texted the number again, asking why they were at my house and what they wanted. Again, the reply came instantly. "Come outside and I'll show you, or do I have to break in?" I texted back that I was calling the police, and then I did. I told the operator that someone was threatening to break into my home and that I had good reason to believe they were already on my property. She said officers would arrive in a few minutes. All I could do was wait and hope they didn't actually try to come in. The person stopped texting after that. I thought about sending another message but decided against it. It didn't seem wise to provoke them. About 5 minutes later, patrol cars pulled up out front. I stepped outside, talked to the officers, and they began searching my yard and the area around the house. They didn't find anyone. While the police were still there, my phone buzzed again. Another message from the same number. "I can see the police there." Attached was a photo of the officers and their cars in front of my house. We all looked around the street and neighboring houses, but saw nothing. The cops searched for another 20 minutes or so and still didn't find anyone. Eventually, they left. I was seriously freaked out, but for whatever reason, that night was the end of it. No more texts, no more strange sounds, no obvious people sneaking around my property. To this day, I have no idea who it was. Sometimes I wonder if it could have been one of my neighbors, but that seems like a stretch. I never got any answers, just that unsettling night and a number I'll never forget. I spend a lot of my free evenings doing DoorDash deliveries. It's a good way to earn some extra money without having to commit to a rigid second job. On this particular night, I started driving around 9 p.m. and kept taking orders steadily until around 11. Things slowed down a bit then, so I just parked near a shopping center with a bunch of fast food places that tend to get late-night orders. Eventually, another order popped up. Pretty normal, delivery about 4 miles away. I picked up the food, started navigation in the app, and began driving. Almost immediately, the map looked odd. The delivery address wasn't at a house or business. When I zoomed in, the pin was on a stretch of road with no buildings at all. It looked like an empty lot or field. The DoorDash map has never been the most accurate thing in the world, so I decided to drive out there anyway and see what was actually there. If there was really a problem, I'd call the customer. It took about 20 minutes to get to that street. It was completely bare. No houses, no cross streets, no cars passing by. Just a long, empty stretch of road. At the far end, it turned into a gravel road. Off to the side, there was a small, weathered wooden sign so worn down I couldn't read it. I turned onto the gravel and flipped on my high beams. Far up ahead, something reflected the light. As I got closer, my phone chimed to tell me I'd arrived. In my headlights, I could see an old, beat-up mobile home or RV sitting by itself. On the door, someone had painted numbers by hand, uneven and sloppy. I checked my phone. The address was 2760. The numbers matched. I got out, food in hand. As I approached the RV, I got a better look at it. It was in rough shape, overgrown with weeds, clearly stationary for a long time. That alone was unsettling. Mobile homes are supposed to move, and this one looked like it hadn't in years. I knocked on the door and waited. This order was for cash, which is rare these days. Seeing the place, it made a bit more sense, but it didn't make me feel any better standing there alone in the dark. The area around the RV was nothing but woods and darkness. Beyond the shell of light from my headlights, it was pitch black. I heard a faint noise from inside and got ready for someone to open the door. Instead, a voice to my right made me jump. I turned and saw a man standing by the corner of the RV, smiling at me. I hadn't heard him walk up. He asked if I had his order. I told him I did and walked over to him, apologizing for the delay and telling him the total. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a $5 bill, and said he just needed to grab the rest. Then he turned and disappeared around the back corner of the RV. On paper, that sounds like a normal interaction, but standing there, everything about him felt off. The way he moved, the tone of his voice, his expression, it all set me on edge. I waited maybe a minute, then started getting really nervous. I eased over to the corner and peeked around. In the dark, a little way off, I saw a person standing completely still near what looked like the silhouette of a shed. Just standing there, not moving. That fear in my gut spiked. Right then, I heard the RV door behind me swing open. I jerked back around, expecting the original guy, but a different man was looking out at me. I started to greet him, but he immediately slammed the door shut. My heart was pounding now. I looked back toward the shed. The figure was walking toward the RV. In his hands, he was holding something long and dark. It looked like a rifle. I ran back to my car, jumped in, and fumbled with the keys for a second before finally starting it. I threw it in reverse and sped back down the gravel road. As I passed, I could see the man with the rifle step around the far side of the mobile home and stand there in the darkness, just watching as I drove away. I don't know what was actually going on back there, and honestly, I don't want to. I went straight home and sat there debating whether or not to call the police. In the end, I didn't. I kept getting hung up on the fact that I didn't really know what I just witnessed. I had no proof beyond my own fear and a weird situation. I regret that decision now. Whatever was happening that night stayed a mystery, and I'll probably always wonder how bad it might have gotten if I hadn't left when I did. Last year, I had a really unsettling experience. For context, I live alone in a house, and that was also the case at the time this happened. One night, around 9 or 10 p.m., I was at home, awake as usual. I tend to stay up late, so I wasn't anywhere near bedtime yet when I heard a knock at my front door. It was unusual to have someone show up that late, unannounced. I went to the front window and peeked out. A woman was standing there on my porch. I hesitated for a bit, hoping maybe she'd just leave, but after about a minute she knocked again. I decided to open the door and see what she wanted. She looked to be in her 20s, with long blonde hair and a black sweatshirt. The second I opened the door, she asked if she could come inside. Immediately, I asked her why. She told me there was some guy after her. I said I could call the police for her right away, but she cut me off and asked again to come in. I still didn't let her. I repeated that I could call the cops, and again she said no. When I asked why she didn't want me to, she just turned around and walked away without another word. She hurried down the street and out of sight. I stepped outside and glanced around, trying to see if there really was anyone out there chasing her or looking for her. I didn't see anyone. The whole encounter left me confused. Later, I went to bed and mostly forgot about it by the next day. I went to work like normal. That evening, I was back home again in the living room when I noticed movement in my front window. I looked and saw the same woman from the night before walking along the street in front of my house. I know most of my neighbors, and I had never seen her before that first night. People also rarely walk on my side of the street in general. She slowed down and stopped directly in front of my house, just standing there and looking at it. After a moment, she seemed to realize I was watching her through the window. She moved on down the street, but then I noticed her passing by several more times, back and forth. I didn't understand who she was or why she was so fixated on my place. The next day, I saw her again, this time while I was driving to work. After I'd left my neighborhood, I noticed a car behind me. When I glanced in the rearview mirror, the driver looked a lot like that woman. She was wearing huge sunglasses, though, so I couldn't be totally sure. At first, I didn't really consider the idea that she might be following me. But as I kept driving, I noticed her making every single turn I did. By the time I was about 90% of the way to work, roughly a 15-minute drive, she was still right behind me. At that point, I was almost certain it was her. When I pulled into the parking lot at my job, she pulled in too. I knew she didn't work there. I parked in my usual spot, and she continued through the lot, taking another lane and disappearing from my view. I wasn't sure if she had parked somewhere or simply driven out the other side. I went inside and never saw her again that day. When I left, her car wasn't in sight either. For the next 2 days, I didn't see her at all, but that just made me more suspicious. At night, I found myself constantly glancing out my windows, half expecting to see her lurking around the street or yard. Nothing. Then, one night, much later than the others, after midnight this time, I was home alone again. I was lying in bed about to go to sleep when I heard a loud noise from outside, near the back of the house. I got up and went to my bedroom doorway. A moment later, I heard another loud impact, this time unmistakably coming from one of my back windows. Someone was hitting it with something. I retreated back into my room, shut the door, and called the police, telling them that someone was trying to break into my house. A short while later, I heard more loud bangs, then a different sound like glass giving way. It sounded like someone had managed to force their way in. I quickly locked my bedroom door. I heard footsteps moving through the house, doors opening and closing. They didn't reach my bedroom, though. Eventually, the noises stopped. After a bit, I realized whoever it was had probably gone down into the basement. I waited there, listening to the silence, until I finally heard the police arrive. I ran out of my room to let them in and told them I thought the intruder was in the basement. They went down, and soon came back up with someone in handcuffs. It was the same blonde woman. I should have suspected it was her all along. I was relieved she'd been caught and that she wouldn't be bothering me anymore. But I never got any explanation for why she was doing any of this. She refused to talk about it, and I never found out the real reason she targeted me. I'm sharing this as a reminder that even people who seem vulnerable or in need of help can have very different intentions from what they claim. I want to share this next story as a warning to anyone who travels alone, especially if you use Airbnb. I've been driving around the country in my car, living out of it to save money. By the time this happened, I'd been on the road for a little over a week, sleeping in the backseat every night. When I finally got to a big enough city, I decided to treat myself to an actual bed for a couple of nights. A shower, some space, and a real mattress sounded amazing. Hotels were pricey, so I went to Airbnb. I booked a place the day before I arrived, which meant most listings were already taken. I eventually found an apartment that looked newly renovated and modern. It was in a prime location, and the price was surprisingly good, almost too good. The catch was that it was a brand new listing with 0 reviews. I told myself the low price was just to attract the first guests, and that being listed on Airbnb at all meant it had to be legitimate. So I booked it. When I got to the building, it was a lot older and more rundown than I expected. Later, I realized my unit was probably the only renovated one in the whole place. The rest of the building looked more like a worn-out dorm hallway than a normal apartment complex. Still, for what I was paying, I couldn't complain too much. When I got inside the actual unit, it did match the photos. Clean, modern, simple. It felt okay. For the first 2 days, everything went smoothly. I'm a woman traveling alone, so I'm very careful. I don't walk around late at night. I always lock the door, and I make sure to latch every lock, including the chain, every single time I'm inside. On the 3rd day, I'd been out all morning and came back midday to change clothes before heading to the beach. Before I left earlier, I had locked the door and put the chain on as usual. Now I was back in the apartment, casually changing with the TV on, standing not far from the door. All of a sudden, the lock clicked and the doorknob started to turn. The door pushed inward until the chain snapped tight and stopped it. I was completely naked. No one else was supposed to have a key. My first startled reaction was to shout, "Excuse me." I immediately pushed the door shut again, re-engaged the locks, and stood there shaking. I hadn't seen who it was. The realization sank in. Whoever that was had a key to this private Airbnb, and they could try again at any time. At first, I thought maybe the owner had gotten the dates wrong and thought I'd already checked out. But my checkout wasn't until the next day. That explanation didn't hold up. After a few minutes of crying and trying not to panic, I pulled myself together and called the owner. I told her exactly what had happened. She sounded genuinely surprised and said no one else was supposed to have keys to the apartment. She told me she was at work and couldn't possibly be the one who tried to open the door. I told her I didn't feel safe staying there anymore, knowing someone else could walk in. But I also didn't want to leave all my belongings behind when I had no idea who had access. It felt like a no-win situation. I called my dad for advice. He told me this was absolutely not okay and that the owner needed to fix it immediately. He wound up talking to her as well. The owner said she'd come over soon with a locksmith, change the lock, and give me a new set of keys. She also explained that she'd only owned the apartment for about 6 months. During that time, she'd only had one other Airbnb guest before me. The place had mostly sat empty while she renovated it. She said the only people who could possibly still have a key were the previous owners or someone connected to them. I'm pretty sure that alone breaks a few rules, if not laws. What really stuck with me was the timing. I'd been spending almost all day, every day, out of the apartment. And yet, in the 10 minutes I happened to be home in the middle of the day, someone chose that exact moment to try to come in. How did they know I was there? Were they planning to rob the place? Or was it something else entirely? If the apartment had been mostly empty for half a year, maybe they'd been using it, or checking in on it, or just waiting for opportunities like this. Or maybe they had noticed me specifically coming and going and had something worse in mind. I still don't know. Those questions haunt me. All I do know is that I'm incredibly lucky I had the chain lock on. If I hadn't, I don't want to imagine what might have happened. I can tell you this much. I didn't leave a glowing review, and I will never again book an Airbnb with no reviews or a price that seems too good to be true. I remember being at a party when I was 4 years old. I was there with my parents. At some point, a man I didn't recognize came up to me and told me he was my uncle. I was 4, so I didn't question it. He said he wanted to show me something out in the woods, just down the road from the house where the party was. He took my hand and started leading me away from the yard, down the road, and into the trees. We walked until we reached a small clearing. Out of nowhere, my mother appeared. She had been watching us and following behind the entire time without me realizing it. She grabbed me, picked me up, and ran back with me to the party without saying a word to the man. Later, she sat me down and told me never to go anywhere with people I didn't know, even if they said they were relatives. Sometimes I think about what might have happened if she hadn't been paying attention that night, and I honestly don't like to picture it. Back when I was in high school, I was driving a friend home one night. It was a weeknight, pretty late, and the roads were mostly empty. I was still a fairly new driver. We were almost to my friend's house when, up ahead, I saw a woman standing directly in the middle of the road, holding something. My friend yelled, and we all started freaking out. As we got closer, we could see she was holding a huge knife. She took a swing at the car as we passed her. We floored it out of there and called the police right away. I had to use the same road to get back home, so on the return trip, we saw her again. This time, officers were there, standing near her and trying to talk to her. She still had that big knife in her hand. We never found out what the story behind it was, but as a new driver out at night, it was one of the scariest things I'd ever seen. I'm a 20-year-old woman, about 118 pounds, and I used to work at a museum that housed some pretty valuable exhibits. I usually started early, around 7 a.m., when it was still dark outside. The security guards would get there about half an hour before I did. One morning, I was walking up to the entrance. Everything was quiet, no one else around except for a skinny, homeless-looking guy wandering nearby. The museum was surrounded by a public park, so seeing someone like that in the area wasn't unusual, and I didn't think much of it. As I started unlocking the front door, though, he suddenly sprinted toward me. In this hurried, nervous voice, he asked me if I knew what time it was. Instinctively, I glanced down at my watch. While I did, 3 other men came running up out of nowhere. They all rushed me at once, violently forcing me down and pushing past me through the door. They dragged me a short distance inside with them. Then they looked up and froze. There were security guards everywhere. They clearly hadn't expected that. They must have thought I was the only one there. The men immediately bolted back out the door and ran off. Looking back, I'm almost certain they planned to either rape or kill me and then rob the museum, thinking they'd have the place to themselves once I opened the door. What they didn't realize was that the security team was already inside, exactly where they didn't want them. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you all so much for watching, especially those of you who made it all the way to the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, please consider leaving a like, sharing it around, commenting, and subscribing if you feel like doing so. If you have any feedback for me, I'd really appreciate it if you left it in the comments as well. For anyone who wants to send in a story or get in touch with me for any reason, you can find links to all my social media in the description below: Facebook, Gmail, Twitter, and so on. Feel free to message me on any of those, and I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as I can. If you decide to submit a story, please include in the subject line what you'd like the story to be called, if it has a title, what type of story it is, and how you'd like to be credited in the description of the video. Try to include as many details as you're comfortable sharing, and use the best grammar and spelling you can. That'll really help your chances of being featured in a future video. That's about all I've got for now. Thank you again for watching, and I hope you have a great day.